Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight is April the 13th, 2015. The show is being recorded on April 12th, 2015, so bear in mind that in the 24 hours that will pass between the time I record this show and the time you hear it, that a lot of things can change there in the field in real time, but we're going to do our best to give you the most up-to-date news and commentary and analysis on what's going on right now. So tonight we're going to try to talk about a number of different things. We're going to try to talk about Syria, of course, and we're going to try to get into the question of Ukraine and more revelations about the color revolution that took place in Ukraine. I need to touch on Rand Paul because that's going to be an issue for about a quarter of the alternative media, still latching onto this guy. We'll talk about, if we can, the question of the coup against Obama, mind war, pedophilia, Satanism, all that stuff. And I would imagine we need to touch on the Walter Scott shooting that took place in North Charleston, South Carolina, about a week ago, since that did, in fact, happen right here in the relatively local area. So we're going to get into that. Now, before we do, I'd like to remind everyone that you can catch Truth on the Tracks here every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on ucy.tv. You can access the show's personal webpage at ucy.tv/TT for Truth on the Tracks. And what you'll find on that webpage is you'll find the player for the show. You'll find the archive links to the show. You'll find the links to my more recent articles there on the website as well. And a chat room that you'll be able to engage in with like-minded people if you so desire. Now, there's also a rebroadcast of my show on Saturday, and to be honest, I'm not sure what time that is. I think it's Saturday evening, but if I'm wrong, then you can check the schedule on the webpage or just tune in on Saturdays to see. I'll get that time for you as soon as possible. Now, if you're interested in my work, I'm a staff writer for activistpost.com, and you can check out my work there as it comes out regularly. But if you're interested in my work specifically, then I would encourage you to go to BrandonTurbeville.com, and that is the website where I repost all of my articles. There are articles from Activist Post, from Natural Blaze. There are articles from the website itself. In other words, I do exclusive content for BrandonTurbeville.com as well, like the Rand Paul article, which means you should be checking BrandonTurbeville.com on a regular basis to catch that information as it comes out. And I've been a little bit slow this past week because of time constraints on getting up the past show and one of the later articles, but that's going to all get up there on the site. All the interviews are there as well. And, of course, you can access the radio show from the web page. You can access the books. I've got 6 books available. On the books tab, there's contact information on the site as well. Everything's there. There's an events page and all of that stuff. Now, again, as I said last week, we are working in the future to update the website, to make it a better website, more interactive, more, more connected to daily news and other websites as well. So we're going to update that. We're going to have hopefully some rollouts of some new material, or at least the old material available in new formats. So we're going to try to update everything that we can in the near future. Hopefully time will allow us to do so. Now, I think what we should do is we should get into the Syria issue before anything else, and we'll do that, and then we'll move on. Got an article up on activistpost.com, Al-Qaeda-linked rebels are Al-Qaeda. And this is something that we've discussed a number of times here on this show and in my articles in the past, which is this idea of calling rebels moderates, calling rebels Al-Qaeda-linked instead of what they are, which is death squad jihadist forces that are the same as ISIS, the same as Al-Qaeda, the same as Al-Nusra, that are all funded by the West and doing what they're being paid to do and directed to do, which is attack the secular government of Bashar al-Assad. Now, we see that since the beginning of this Western-backed foreign invasion of jihadist terrorists into Syria, it goes far back as late 2010, the American and Western mainstream media has attempted to present the death squad fighters on the ground as being a two-sided opposition. In other words, one is, as the media presents it, is a group of Islamic extremists, and the other group would be the moderate rebels. Now, I have documented extensively the nature of these terrorists, right? I've proven that this characterization is inaccurate and that there's no such thing as a moderate rebel in Syria. But of course, information and facts have never stopped media outlets, at least in this country, from producing presentations that are in contrast to reality. So go read my article, The Roots of ISIS, and you'll realize just how false of a description this actually is. Now, more and more evidence has come out, even in the public sphere, regarding the official narrative of moderate rebels, right? And it's proven that narrative to be false. The corporate media outlets have then responded with giving the terrorists more name changes, more distortion surrounding these proxy forces on the ground. And to give you an example, we have Al-Nusra Front. And these forces are being referred to in the mainstream media as Al-Qaeda-linked fighters, right? Al-Qaeda-linked fighters. They're being painted as if they're just a mixture of moderate agents that are willing to work with anybody that has a similar objective as themselves, whether that's the other rebels or Al-Qaeda or anybody else. But the truth is that Al-Nusra is not Al-Qaeda linked, but it's Al-Qaeda. And if you look at the orbit of the Levant, which is the Syria, Iraq area, Al-Nusra was not really a separate fighting force. Al-Nusra was the Syrian branch of Al-Qaeda, while Al-Qaeda in Iraq was the Iraqi version. So you had Al-Qaeda, and then you had Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and you had Al-Nusra Front in Syria. Same organization, just different operational names for the territory that they were working in. And shortly after that, you had Al-Qaeda in Iraq being rebaptized the Islamic Emirate of Iraq and the Levant. So all of these groups were subsidiaries of the same overarching organization, which is Al-Qaeda proper. Both of these groups were renamed ISIS because the West, who funds, controls, and directs these terrorists, needed a name change for propaganda purposes. So this is there's a couple of reasons why these name changes took place, and one of them were logistical constraints, and the other were because of the Western propaganda needs. So they changed these individual groups, like Nusra, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, etc. They changed the names, but they also retained them. If that seems a little complicated, then essentially just first bear in mind that there's no difference between ISIS and Al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda, and there's no difference in the source of the funding or the training or the weapons or the direction that these organizations are receiving, and that comes from the United States, Israel, and NATO. But the Western propaganda needs really revolve around this requirement that the U.S. and NATO have forces on the ground that they can present as moderate to a gullible public, so they can justify providing aid to them. There's also the need to present the so-called opposition as multifaceted, and so in the sense that they're going to try to present this as if it has no centralized control over the terrorists all across the country. In terms of the logistical constraints for the terrorists operating on the ground, there were again, Al-Nusra was the Syrian branch, Al-Qaeda in Iraq was the Iraqi branch. They did have their command and control structure as a subsidiary, but when you officially and formally merge them together, there is some disagreement among the leadership. So it was easier to maintain these groups as fighting forces, as sort of separate fighting brigades that coordinate together closely, as opposed to one entity to where individuals inside are jockeying for control. So it's actually pretty smart to do it in the way they've done it, logistically as well as propaganda-based narratives as well. So just to wrap this up, even some of the mainstream outlets recently have had, well, not even recently, but even early on, were forced to admit that the organizations there were one and the same. they did this, it was by accident, but they had to admit it nonetheless. And so what they essentially did was stated that all the groups that we just talked about are offshoots of Al-Qaeda. And this was done in Al Jazeera, this was done in CNN, and this again by accident, but it was done nonetheless. So this very tangled web of Western propaganda and false narratives, we have this constant debate over whether this group or that group is either working together or fighting with one another. And what it reveals is that the command and control structure remains the same for all of these organizations. That any disagreement between the leaders of these organizations is just basic, logistical issues. It was a public relations issue or strategic advantage by presenting itself as being divided, right? A strategic advantage in the sense of being presenting yourself as being a multifaceted opposition. This has nothing to do with a true lack of cooperation or where the ultimate goals and ultimate orders originate. There's nothing. In other words, what I'm saying is that any disagreement between the forces on the ground is not a result of a legitimate disagreement. It is either a public relations ploy, propaganda, or there's a strategic advantage to be exploited by presenting oneself as a separate brigade that has nothing to do with Al-Qaeda, or to that extent. I mean, give you an example of that. We can look at the Qatar. Look at Qatar recently offered to provide al-Nusra with an even greater supply of money. And again, the Nusra is receiving money and weapons and training and intelligence from NATO and the GCC already, but Qatar recently offered to really do this publicly and really give the movement a shot in the arm by providing even more weapons and more training and more money to Nusra, and the only condition was that they renounce their affiliation with Al-Qaeda. It wasn't that they had to stop being Al-Qaeda. It wasn't they had to stop doing the things that Al-Qaeda does, or working with Al-Qaeda, or fighting alongside Al-Qaeda. It was only that they publicly renounce Al-Qaeda. So it wasn't based on any methods, and it wasn't based on any actions. It was based on a verbal denouncement. And so that's just public relations purposes, in other words. So it was pretty telling, however, because al-Nusra even refused to play along with this. So why should it play along, really? I mean, if it continues to receive weapons and intelligence and training and money, regardless of whether or not it repudiates Al-Qaeda. So it's done that since its formation, and it continues to do that today. So to just sum all this up, the representation of al-Nusra or any other terrorist fighting group in Syria as having links to Al-Qaeda, that's nothing more than propaganda motif. It is a cover-up, and it's designed to perpetuate the lie that there is such a thing as a moderate fighting force opposing Assad, and there's not. It is, if you want to look at the moderate opposition is exactly where you look for a moderate opposition, which is in the parliament. And even those guys have come around to the Assad way of thinking after the NATO GCC debacle and the hordes of apes and savages running rampant across the country today. Now, we will pick up on Syria at some other point. We've got to get into a few other things. Let's talk about the shooting in Charleston. The Walter Scott shooting in Charleston. Now, this was, if anybody has had the opportunity to see the video, it was clearly murder. This was an individual, Walter Scott. He had been pulled over by the North Charleston Police Department, and by this Slager, I believe his name is. And now there's two videos. There's a video that was shot in the park that involved the actual shooting, and then there was a video, the dash cam of the traffic stop. So if we look at this from the beginning, we see the traffic stop. Walter Scott has been pulled over a broken tail light. The officer went and checked his license. He asked him about the paperwork for the car. Scott said he didn't have the paperwork for the car because he was buying it this week. They didn't have the paperwork yet. I guess he was out test driving it, or he was out, or he had possession of the car but not the actual paperwork yet. Don't know what the details are on that. But Scott at one point gets out of his car to get the officer's attention, and the officer yells at him to get back in the car, because that is the standard process whenever you are having contact with the police. The police have been trained. At one time, the police didn't mind you getting out of the car and talking to you as a human being, but now, of course, you have to get in the car because you're a slave. You have to sit there because the officer is a coward, and he'll piss all over himself if he thinks that there's any possible danger to himself. So if you get out of the car, he will piss himself and probably shoot you, because he has been trained to think that every American is a terrorist, or he's just a general psychopath that wants to rain terror and destruction on the general public. But let's not get off topic. This guy, Scott, while Officer Slager was in the car running the paperwork or the license, Scott's license or whatever he was running in the car, Scott gets out of the car and he takes off running. Now, it's later been presented that it was possible that he had unpaid child support, and that he ran because he didn't want to have to go to jail over this child support, because they were going to find out that he had warrants over child support. So he ran, and he ran through this park area. Then we hear on the dash cam the cop yelling, he's running, stop running, taser, and then all you hear is some music from the cop's radio. And then we go to the second video, which is shot in the park. And what you find is Walter Scott standing still. The cop is behind him. It looks like he has his wrist, and he has him stopped, right? He's not a threat. He's stopped. Looks like he's about to put handcuffs on him. Now, here's the only problem. You don't know exactly what happened, whether Slager tased Scott again or whether he was going to tase Scott again. But what happens is Scott turns around. He goes to run, and he swats the taser out of the cop's hand. Now, it looks like Scott has already been tased, because you can see, if you look very closely at the video, you can see these wires that come out of the taser, and it looks like they're sticking in Scott's back. So it looks like he's already been tased. And so he runs and he swats the taser away. The taser falls on the ground, and Slager runs after him for about 3 steps and then fires 8 shots, hitting Scott in the back 5 times. In the back 5 times. Now, this man is not a threat. He's not armed. He's running away. And he's shot at 8 times, hit 5 times in the back by Slager. So Slager goes up to him after he's laying on the ground, probably gasping for air, and he throws the handcuffs on him. Now, another cop comes up, and this is sort of left out of the race baiting media, but I should mention that Scott is black, the victim is black, the cop, Slager, is white, but there is another cop that comes up who's black. And I don't know this cop's name, but the black cop comes up and immediately goes straight for Walter Scott, lying on the ground, shot 5 times in the back, in handcuffs, and starts going through his pockets. Now, while he's going through his pocket, the officer, Slager, gets up, goes back and picks up the taser on the ground and drops it by Scott. The report states that Scott fought him, took his taser, and essentially tried to turn it on him, tried to turn it on to the cop. That's the report. The only problem with the report was that an individual was in the park at the same time, or in the area at the same time, who caught all of this on cell phone video to show that the cop's story was a total lie. Now, to the city's credit, Slager was fired, arrested, and charged with murder, as he should have been. This is the right charge. It's the right action to take. Now, I don't know what happened to the second cop. I'll point out that the second cop, in my opinion, should be prosecuted for either accessory to murder or the conspiracy to cover it up. Because remember, he came in and he signed off on Slager's story, and he did nothing to help Walter Scott. So this is 100% murder. If this man is not convicted, they're absolutely, well, I won't go any further on that statement. But this man, there's no reason that this man shouldn't be convicted. The video evidence is there. He is a murderer. He killed Walter Scott. He murdered Walter Scott. Plain and simple. There is no debating this. And he lied about it and tried to cover it up. So we hope to God Officer Slager goes to prison for the rest of his natural life, because that's where he deserves to be. And I hope, unfortunately, he'll go to a little cop prison. He won't go to the general population where he has to be around the people whose lives he's ruined for the last few years. No, he'll go to special cop prison, but at least he's in prison, and at least he will be kept away from civilized people, hopefully for the rest of his life. I don't hold out for justice, unfortunately, because I know how this stuff works. I look for either a light sentence or that he actually gets off on this charge. But we hope not. Of course, we have low expectations, but we have high hopes that he is convicted. I mean, the video convicts him. Just take a look at the video if you haven't seen it. Most people in the country have seen it. Now, what I will say is that on April 12th, 2015, I have to say that I'm proud of the people of North Charleston, because this is not Ferguson, right? This is, there have been protests, absolutely. And I want to try to look at a couple of things from different areas, different angles here, because let's look at the first thing is what you had in Ferguson was you had race baiters. You had Al Sharpton coming in, and the notorious parasite who's made a killing off of stealing money from black people for years and years and years. This guy was an FBI informant at one time. I think he was a pimp who got caught, and then he became an FBI informant. He is really a disgusting piece of trash, and how he has any credibility in any community is beyond me. But thankfully, when Sharpton said that he was going to come down to South Carolina and be there for the family of Walter Scott said he was not welcome at the funeral. So good for the family. They said that they did not want this to turn into a Ferguson-style circus, and good for the family. So far, in Charleston, in North Charleston, South Carolina, we have avoided riots. We have avoided violence. We have largely avoided this racial silliness that took place in Ferguson. So we want to. There's two sides to this, right? There's the Black Lives Matter crowd, and we'll talk about them in a second, and we'll talk about the. I guess we'll start with the Black Lives Matter stuff, right? This is something that's going to have to be dealt with. Automatically, it's Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Well, sorry, but other lives matter too, not just black ones. And what we're going to try to point that out here in a second. But this is the problem. This is what this Black Lives Matter stuff, when it gets involved, what it does is it splinters any sort of united front against this police action, because you're essentially setting up a premise that this is a black issue. It's not a black issue. Does it affect the black community? Absolutely. Does it affect the black community disproportionately? Well, that's kind of up for debate. I think you could argue either way. There are some points that say that there's a higher rate of police violence against blacks, but there's also other factors involved. So we're not going to get into that debate tonight, but what we're going to say is that this is an issue that faces everybody. And if you turn this into a racial issue, then essentially you're alienating everyone else. You're alienating whites, you're alienating Hispanics, you're alienating Asians. You make it a black issue. And I'm sorry, you're going to fail at this. And then you invite people like Al Sharpton coming in, and you invite the NAACP, which has also made lots of money by ripping off black people for years. And it's going to be a failure. They'll come in, they'll stir up trouble, they'll stir up division between the races, and they'll cause, let's face it, they'll help cause riots, and they'll help cause violence, and then they'll leave you in the rubble and they'll go laughing all the way to the bank while you have to clean up and live in a half-destroyed ghetto. So let's not forget that. Now, for a lot of people, and these are generally more conservative white people, who I see criticizing the fact that there were protests at all, because they were saying, wait a minute, the city did the right thing, why are you protesting? This does warrant some social demonstration, of course, because Walter Scott is not the only victim of the North Charleston Police Department or police departments across the country, and we cannot ignore this. The issue, the protests were not that Slager, the treatment of Slager was too light. I think the protesters agreed that he should have been charged with murder, but I think what people are suggesting is that this is not a random incident. This is not an isolated incident. That this is really a business as usual. And let's not forget that if that gentleman in the park with the phone who took the video of the shooting, had he not been there, this would have been a completely different story. Had he not been there, one person, had he not been there, then the story would have been exactly what Slager said it was. That Scott took his taser and turned it on him, and he shot him in self-defense. And all of the news media, the mainstream news media, your credible news organizations with nice reputations, would have told you, the headlines would have been, officer involved shooting, suspect turns taser on officer. Officer feared for his life when suspect pointed taser at him. Something to that effect. And you would have believed it. Of course. Because magic costumes, never lie. That would have been the story. And if this cell phone hadn't been there, the police department would have done nothing. So bear that in mind. And it's not an isolated incident. This is extremely common, especially in 2015. So there is a deeper issue here. There is a wider issue here. So my advice to the protesters would be threefold, right? First of all, you would drop the Black Lives Matter crap. Drop it. You want a hashtag? Use Our Lives Matter. That's free. I'm giving it to you, right? Use Our Lives Matter. That's fine, because you can bring other people in. Obviously, don't resort to any kind of fit throwing. The city did do what it was supposed to do, so we have to bear that in mind. Good for the city on this one. But again, we also have to bear in mind that this is a systemic problem and that this has to be dealt with. So these protests need to be orderly, and they shouldn't lose track of what they really are after here, which is the ending of this shoot to kill with impunity philosophy and authority that have been given to American police. So what you need is demands, okay? And this is not body cameras. The demands should be something else. This is higher IQ requirements for being hired as a police officer. The better training, demilitarized training. In other words, if you're going to have to do psychological profiles, what I hear from a lot of people about police, they say, police are some of the most heavily psychologically screened individuals in terms of job markets in the country. Well, if that's the case, you're doing this intentionally, right? And we know you're doing this intentionally. But if they're so heavily psychologically screened, it means you're looking for the ones with the psychopathic tendencies and the sociopathic tendencies and the dipshits, who can barely spell their own name. So we need some demands, and that is the demilitarization of police. They don't need armored personnel carriers. They don't need grenade launchers. They don't need SWAT teams. They don't need Nazi helmets. They need to be cracked down on in terms of steroids, to be honest, because a lot of these guys are absolutely insane. They need to have higher IQ requirements. They need to have better training in how to deal with the public, some type of maybe not a management degree, but some type of management courses, so they understand how to actually talk to people as if they are humans. Because now police talk to you as if you're an occupied people, in a foreign country. And some of us were talking about this many years ago, and we're called conspiracy theorists. But there you go. So that needs to be dealt with. It's systemic. And you need to have demands. Don't just go out and protest and say, don't even say our lives matter. If that's your only thing, yeah, of course your lives matter. But what do you want to do about it? What do you want the city police to do about it? And I just gave you some demands, okay? The demilitarization. Get rid of these SWAT teams. Get rid of these personnel carriers. Get rid of this outrageous militarized equipment. Raise the IQ levels. Have some type of management courses, some type of public relations courses, not the public relations like Bernays, but the ability to talk to other people without acting like an absolute brute and savage and an animal. So these are your demands. Try going for that. It'll make it better because you have something that you are demanding that the system can actually give you in order to throw you a bone, and you can work from there. So there's that. That's the opinion on the Walter Scott shooting. And again, so far, this has been going in the direction, or at least not going in the wrong direction. So we hope that these gentlemen, these ladies and gentlemen out there protesting get some demands, and that they're able to do this in a proper form. And again, demands. Get those demands. So you have something to back you up. You have something to cause the police department to throw you a bone, right? Any one of those things would be better than what you're in right now. All right, let's look at Rand Paul, because Rand Paul's in the news, and I'm probably going to piss off a quarter of the audience tonight, but that's okay. Now, a lot of people have seen through little Rand, and a lot of people, probably a lot of the listeners here, are probably not going to be a fan of Rand Paul for a number of reasons. And I know a lot of my libertarian friends, and especially the anarchists, don't like Rand Paul. The anarchists don't like him because he's I guess it legitimizes government. But the libertarians, I think, have realized that Rand Paul is not even a libertarian, that Rand Paul is a Republican, that Rand Paul is a neocon. So I've got this article up. It is at BrandonTurbeville.com exclusively. And if you are listening and you have a website and you want to repost this article, then you can. You don't have to pay me, right? This is out there. It's public use now. Public use. It's public use in the sense that you're going to have, if you repost it, I want my name and my website linked back to. So that's my requirement. You put the article up. You put it in full. You don't cut pieces out. Don't add anything to it. It's mine, but you can put your name. Put my name. I'm sorry. Brandon Turbeville, and you can link back to my website, BrandonTurbeville.com, link back to the article. But if you want to put this up on your website, feel free, and you can put it up under your website's name if you like. It's my contribution to humanity for this week. So, all right, so it's called 20 Reasons I Will Not Stand with Rand. And basically, I'm kind of surprised at a lot of people, the few people who are still supporting Rand, and I think it's safe to say that not only is Rand a Republican, though, Rand is a neocon, right? Because I think a lot of people have given him attention because he's made these so-called principled stands, but if you understand what Rand Paul has done with any shred of political judgment, you realize that this is nothing more than publicity stunts that are, set up to boost his political career. It's not surprising, unfortunately, that Rand Paul is receiving so much attention from the alternative media, and that many activists themselves are, who claim they're fighting for the rights of the American people, are supporting him. But I would have hoped that the alternative media and the activist community would be a little more discerning about Rand, but their track record, I guess we should say, is showing that this is the opposite of the case. And I think, obviously Rand's support comes from the libertarian quarters. Most of them are drawn to Rand because of his father, Ron Paul, and others are drawn to Rand because of this free market fetishism and pro-Wall Street, pro-corporate stance that allows money to act as God above everything else in society. In other words, the Austrian school. Right, so if you support the Austrian school, you probably would be attracted to Rand because of that psychopathic economic program that involves a lack of empathy, and well, again, it's psychopathic. It's really awful. But we'll go into the Austrian school at some other point. And you can say, a lot of the Rand Paul voters are really just Republicans who smoked pot once or twice and realized that it didn't turn them into an axe murderer. And, I guess that's why he appeals to more younger Republicans than the, traditional gray-headed drug war pimps of the Republican Party. Now, it's a shame that Paul has so much respect in the alternative media community and the activist community because he's betrayed their trust, he's betrayed their values, he's even betrayed their talking points on a number of occasions. And, during a contest for a Republican nomination, there's no doubt, really, that many people in the activist community have, especially those that have some sort of a right-leaning perspective, will see Rand Paul as a better option than the other Republican candidates. If Paul wins the nomination, if he gets placed next to Hillary Clinton or John Kerry, well, that'll make him look even better. But, unfortunately, a vote for Rand Paul is just a vote for the Republican Party. It's a vote for continued war. That's right, continued war. It's a vote for continued domination by Wall Street and big corporations, absolutely, because that's what the Austrian school is. And it's actually a vote for big government, and we'll throw that in. We'll get into that in a minute. So Paul had this publicity stunt over the filibuster, the nomination of John Brennan to CIA director. When he did that, we had the slogan that came out: "Stand with Rand." The filibuster accomplished nothing generally in terms of real results, and that was because of Rand Paul's own acquiescence. And the American people were then told if they wanted to stand against targeted drone killings of American citizens, they had to stand with Rand, okay? And then we had Paul suing the Obama administration over NSA spying scandals. If we want to draw the line against warrantless surveillance, we have to stand with Rand. And all these catchy slogans are always a mainstay of political operations at color revolutions and deception campaigns. And quite frankly, the campaign of Rand Paul is no different. And I will tell you right now that if Paul is victorious, and I don't think he will be, then his voters are going to wake up in the same way that Obama supporters did. They're going to be disappointed, they're going to be betrayed, and they're going to be bankrupt. So let's talk about a few of these reasons that I will not stand with Rand, and we'll try to get as many of these in before the end of the show. We're going to get into some deeper things next week, but we need to get into this Rand Paul thing since this is trending now. Now, number one, Rand Paul supports the killing of American citizens with drones on American soil without trial. All right, so it's going to surprise a lot of people, but there was a 13-hour filibuster of the nomination of John Brennan to the post of CIA director. And as I said earlier, that was Rand Paul that conducted the filibuster. I said earlier that was a publicity stunt. That was not a principled stand against the assertion by the U.S. government that it can use drones to kill American citizens, because Rand Paul quickly changed his tune after the Boston bombing. After the Boston bombing, Rand began advocating for the use of drones, not only for surveillance in an emergency situation, but to kill suspects without charge or trial, even if that person is an American citizen. This is what Rand Paul had to say. He says, if someone comes out of a liquor store with a weapon and $50 in cash, I don't care if a drone kills him or if a policeman kills him. In that same interview, he also stated, quote, I've never argued against any technology being used when you have an imminent threat and active crime going on, end quote. In other words, an imminent threat is constituted by a liquor store robbery, setting the bar for an emergency situation quite low, don't you think? So, Paul lied. Rand Paul lied. He has argued against using drone technology. Absolutely. He says, I've never argued against technology that could be used during an imminent threat. That's bullshit, because he has argued for technology being used when you have an imminent threat. He has argued against drone technology. He argued against the technology in the filibuster against Brennan when he says, this is what he says, quote, I will speak as long as it takes until the alarm is sounded from coast to coast that our Constitution is important, that your rights to trial by jury are precious, that no American should be killed by a drone on American soil without first being charged with the crime, without being found to be guilty by a court. So, that statement changed to, if there's a killer on the loose in the neighborhood, I'm not against drones being used, after Boston bombing. So, not only did he flip-flop, he lied about flip-flopping. So, just another example of a slimy politician changing his position at the moment when public opinion shifted momentarily. And all the indications are that Paul does believe that drones can be used to kill Americans without charge or trial, even on American soil, and that this rhetoric saying the opposite was nothing more than rhetoric. It was political posturing for a portion of this sorely misinformed base. Remember, I don't care if a drone kills him or a policeman kills him, so that's what he has to say. All right, number 2, Rand Paul. He is an apologist for greed. Now, during the debate over whether or not to extend unemployment benefits to millions of out-of-work Americans in an economy that is in a world economic depression and that has about 25 to 26% unemployment rates, higher in some areas, Rand Paul opposed the extension of unemployment benefits. So, that would put Rand Paul on the side of Wall Street and big corporations and austerity. And that's not a surprise considering his voting record and his public statements and the funding that he's gotten. But in the midst of an economic depression, of an economic depression that really the free trade economics that he is a proponent of, have caused that depression, Paul would see millions of Americans who are incapable of finding jobs because those jobs don't exist. He would see those people bereft of the only means of subsistence they have, which is the unemployment insurance. And even worse than that, Paul's arrogant and preposterous justification for this decision is perhaps one of the more insulting statements coming from any congressional parasite that we have holding office in recent years. This is what Paul said to Fox News. I do support unemployment benefits for the 26 weeks that they're paid for. If you extend it beyond that, you do a disservice to these workers. When you allow people to be on unemployment insurance for 99 weeks, you're causing them to become part of this perpetual unemployed group in our economy. Well, that's in quote. The perpetual unemployment issue is caused by multiple free trade negotiations and treaties coupled with the Wall Street gambling economy, not unemployment benefit payments. Quite the opposite. Rand Paul is going to argue that in the midst of a worldwide economic depression where jobs are scarce and the few jobs that do exist are well below subsistence wages, that millions of Americans should simply be kicked off of the rolls to satisfy his free market fantasy and the fantasy of his Wall Street backers. Now, Paul is known for these ridiculous statements like the one I just read. In December 2013, Paul went to Detroit, and this is his quote in Detroit. He says, "The president plays this sort of thing of envy and says to us, you should not like the rich people. You should punish the rich people. I say no, reward them. They create the jobs. That's who we work for. Anybody here work for a poor person? So you want rich people to have money so you can have more money." All right, that's what he says. All right, Paul is asserting making the rich richer is essentially trickle-down economics. That might make sense to a lot of people, but it's been a repeated failure year after year after year after year. And just a quick aside, Paul asks, anybody know somebody that works for a poor person? Well, I don't know, Rand. You are a senator being paid by the people of Kentucky to do a job and represent them in the U.S. Senate. And if you look around at Kentucky, I would say you are employed by poor people. So you should shut your damn mouth. Now, we can argue for a while about whether or not the rich create jobs. Oh, you've got to have money to go to the rich because the rich, if they get this money, they use it to create jobs. And the problem is they don't. They use that money and they go gamble with it, and they gamble with derivatives, and they invest in derivatives markets and that sort of thing, which makes the economy even worse. So that doesn't work either. You could also make the the argument that if these people, these so-called poor people that Rand Paul seems to look down upon so much, and that unfortunately keep voting for his ridiculous policies year after year, or at least they did last year, or last election, if they had more money to spend, they would spend that money and then cause a greater need for more materials, which would cause a need for more jobs. But we won't get into the whole economic debate. You see where Rand Paul has firmly come down on the side of the rich. If there's class warfare, Rand Paul isn't going to be holding a pitchfork. He's going to be holed up in the castle with the cannons and the kings and the queens. So we know where Rand Paul stands. Now, number 3, Rand Paul supported letting BP completely off the hook. So much for this personal responsibility, Rand. Now, after the Gulf Water Horizon oil spill, which devastated much of the Louisiana coastline, and if some accounts are accurate, it's still devastating the area. Obama gave a number of speeches to satisfy the conscience of lefties and greenies and all the enviro-Nazis, and not just enviro-Nazis, but people who are concerned legitimately with the environment, but who didn't really have the political knowledge to see what was happening. He slapped BP on the wrist for what they did. Now this was, believe me, a slap on the wrist. But Rand Paul, never to be left out of the side of the oligarchs and the big corporations, came to the aid of BP to rescue them from even the slap on the wrist. And he came out and said that Obama's tepid criticism of BP, but it was actually a defense and facilitation of the oil company. Rand Paul said that was too much. That was too harsh. This is what he says. What I don't like from the president's administration is this sort of, I'll put my boot on the throat of BP. I think that sounds really un-American, and in his criticism of business, end quote. His criticism of business. This shows you where the libertarianish Austrian school, and I'm not talking about social libertarians here who just want government out of their lives. I'm talking about the economic libertarianism in the Austrian school. Austrian school specifically. I should really just refer to it as the Austrian school. Free market fetishism. But this shows you what their God is, right? Their God is business. Their God is money. Has nothing. They don't care about people. People are worthless to them, except as commodities, except as human labor, human capital. To the Austrian school proponent, the ultimate God is money and business. So Rand Paul doesn't like business being criticized. And he thinks it's un-American to criticize a British oil industry. Let's not forget that. It's British petroleum, right? It's not even American. I don't care about subsidiary companies, right? This is British. And it's un-American to criticize them for dumping tons and tons and tons of oil into the Gulf, destroying that whole Gulf area, and then bringing private contractors in to create a police state so people can't even videotape it on public beaches. That's what Rand Paul stands for. You want to keep voting for this loser? All right, so number 4, Rand Paul appears to oppose the minimum wage and other basic common sense labor protections. Yeah, absolutely. So let's look. In 2014, 2015, this should not be up for debate whether or not we have a minimum wage. If you would have come to someone in the 1950s and early 1960s when the American economy was at its height and when the middle class numerically outnumbered the poor and the rich, that we had a higher middle class than anybody else than any other group, and you would have come up and said, we want to eliminate the minimum wage, Americans would have laughed you off of the stage because they would have realized how stupid this is. And this is why Austrian school economics were underground for some time, because it's dumb, for one thing, but because Americans had actually seen the benefit of some policies of I guess what you could say, just a few very small, minuscule policies of American system of economics, kind of distinctly American, that raised the living standards of the country. Of course, the labor movement, which raised the standards of the country. Had nothing to do with the Austrian school, of course. That did the opposite. But people were experiencing the benefits of the labor movement and many other aspects of the American economy at that time. So they would have laughed you off at the stage if Rand Paul had run for president back then. So anyway, Wall Street corporate interests, they've sought to repeatedly eliminate minimum wage laws and return the U.S. to a low-wage economy. They've pretty much done that now, even with the minimum wage. They've created a low-wage economy. And, of course, they want to create an even greater gap between the rich and the poor. Now, we've had moves made toward repealing the appropriate legislation against child labor. And we have to recognize that child labor protections have indeed been interpreted in outlandish ways by bureaucrats, as they always are, and by government bosses, to impede children from assisting their families on farms or personal businesses and that sort of thing. But child labor protections, interpreted reasonably, are essential guards against the exploitation of children in factories and other corporate institutions. Now, Rand Paul has largely dodged the questions regarding the minimum wage and child labor protections, despite the fact that these issues are extremely important to working people. But again, Rand Paul's not interested in working people. At the very least, these are yes or no questions. And Paul is smart enough to know that coming out against the minimum wage or child labor laws are going to alienate him from sensible Americans who don't view working for pennies or sending their child off to do to do work that should be done by adults as a legitimate way of life. He knows that. But through all of his attempts to dodge the issue, you can see an anti-worker sentiment seeping through. Now, during Paul's publicity stunt filibuster of Brennan's nomination, he referenced the need to strengthen individuals' rights by, quote, rethinking the Lochner case. And the Lochner case is one that found that New York could not limit bakers' working hours from a labor standpoint. And that decision was subsequently overturned, but Paul apparently believes it shouldn't have been. And he argues that raising the minimum wage is responsible for raising unemployment. That is incorrect, to say the least. That is not what is shown. It's the opposite. Raising the minimum wage actually raises employment. And in an interview with ABC, Paul says, quote, it's not a question of whether the federal government can or cannot. I think that's decided. I think the question you have to ask is whether or not when you set the minimum wage it may cause unemployment, end quote. So at the very least, Paul doesn't support raising the minimum wage. But he apparently doesn't have the courage to state that just yet. But whether he will or not, in terms of stating it publicly, we'll see. But number 5, Rand Paul is anti-union. Of course, I know a lot of my Austrian school friends are probably jumping up and down and saying, we're anti-union too. Well, you're also anti-civilization. You're also anti-high living standards. You also have an anti-high wage economy. So you're anti-everything that really should represent what should be a great country. So, just go ahead and align yourself with Rand Paul and his anti-union stance. Sorry, but, I want the high-wage economy, and I want to see the middle class as a larger group of people than the rich and the poor. Again, so I'd like to see even more of the middle class, and you're not going to get that with stupid free market economics in Austrian school. But let's talk about Rand and his anti-union stance. We had Rand Paul, along with his friend Mitch McConnell, and we'll talk about that in a minute. They're attempting to, or they did attempt, to ram through a national right-to-work law through the U.S. Congress. Now, you may have legitimate issues with policies that mandate that workers pay dues to unions they might not want to have to join. You could handle this issue in a much more effective and fair manner. Okay, so that's an issue, but it can be handled better, not by busting unions. Paul's bill wanted to cripple union membership on the national level, which is highly ironic because this man cries about states' rights every time an issue comes up, right? Apparently federal legislation is only good when it benefits bankers and corporations. So this type of legislation is just one more step in this attempt by financier and corporate interests in breaking the collective bargaining rights of the American people, as well as their most valuable tool to protect or protest, I guess we should say, foreign entanglements and domestic abuses. They break up unions, and that's usually signaled crackdown at home, fascism at home, and adventurism abroad. So Iran's in the news. Let's talk about number 6. Rand Paul supported sanctions on Iran. December 2012, U.S. Senate unanimously approved new economic sanctions against Iran. And the sanctions were tacked on to a defense spending bill. They're aimed at damaging Iran's energy and their shipping and port industries. And if you look, if we have time here, we'll talk about we'll sum this up in the Economic Policy Journal. It writes, quote, building on the U.S. sanctions passed last year in 2011, the new amendment would designate Iran's energy, port, shipping, and shipbuilding sectors as entities of proliferation because they support and fund Iran's proliferation activities. Under the new rules, the United States would sanction anyone selling or supplying certain commodities to Iran, including graphite, aluminum, steel, and some industrial software, end quote. Now, Rand Paul was one of the senators who saw fit to impose sanctions on Iran, and of course, which is a nation that poses no threat to the United States. In other words, Rand Paul supported these sanctions, to be clear. Now, a lot of libertarians and activists are going to claim that Rand Paul actually supports peace, but remember, Ron Paul, who is a libertarian, said that sanctions are an act of war, and he's right. And Rand apparently would either doesn't believe that, or Rand would like to see war with Iran. Remember, Rand is also one of the 47 traitors, and we'll get into that, I guess, next week. But Iran has been exonerated time and time again from any wrongdoing according to international law. Iran has not acted aggressively toward the United States. It hasn't attacked a country in 188 years. And I asked last week on the radio show, has it been 188 days since the United States or Israel has attacked somebody? So that's a question. Now we need to, I'm just going to rattle off some more of these reasons that I'm not going to vote for Rand. I'm not going to stand with Rand, but we'll go into detail next week. Number 7, Rand Paul promotes neocon-style Islamophobia. Number 8, Rand Paul's irrational and contradictory stance on Ukraine. Number 10, Rand Paul is a supporter of Israel. Number 11, Rand Paul seeks punishment for whistleblowers. Number 12, Rand Paul hypocritically opposes birthright citizenship. Number 13, Rand Paul endorsed Mitt Romney while his father was still campaigning for president. Number 14, Rand Paul endorsed Mitch McConnell. Number 15, the Secret Society connections. 16, Rand Paul drill baby drill. 17, Rand Paul's funding. 18, Rand Paul says Dick Cheney is a patriot who loves the country as much as himself. And 19, Rand Paul endorsed Susan Collins. And, of course, 20, Rand Paul signed Tom Cotton's letter rejecting any nuclear deal with Iran. So we will finish Rand Paul up next week and hopefully get into some details in terms of some stuff going on in the military, mind war, pedophilia, and Satanism, if we can. I've been talking about it for weeks, but we hope to finally get to it. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.
For more news, visit pigminews.com.